Before America became a superpower, before the flag, before the Constitution, and before the idea of the American dream, there were 13 colonies living under the control of the British Empire. At first, they were loyal subjects of the king, but slowly anger began to grow. Taxes, soldiers, control, no voice in government. And then, one question changed history forever. How long should people obey a government that refuses to listen to them? This is the story of how ordinary farmers, merchants, printers, lawyers, and soldiers challenged the most powerful empire on earth and created the United States of America. In the 1700s, the American colonies were still part of Great Britain. The colonies depended on British trade, British protection, and British laws. Life was not easy. Most people worked hard every day. Farmers grew crops. Merchants sold goods. Shipbuilders worked in busy ports like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. But the colonies were also growing stronger. They had their own local governments. They had newspapers. They had churches, schools, businesses, and communities. Many colonists began to think of themselves not just as British subjects, but as Americans. Still, few people wanted independence at first. Most only wanted one thing: fair treatment. But after years of conflict and pressure, that simple demand became something much bigger. The road to revolution began with a war. From 1754 to 1763, Britain fought France in North America during what became known as the French and Indian War. The war was expensive, brutal, and dangerous. Britain eventually won, gaining more land and power in North America. But victory came with a heavy cost. Britain was deeply in debt, and British leaders believed the American colonies should help pay for the war. After all, they argued, the war had protected the colonies. But the colonists saw it differently. They believed they were being forced to pay taxes without having any real voice in the British government. This idea would become one of the most famous complaints in American history. No taxation without representation. After the war, Britain passed new taxes on the colonies. The Stamp Act taxed paper goods like newspapers, legal documents, and playing cards. The Townshend Acts taxed items like glass, paint, paper, and tea. To British leaders, these taxes seemed reasonable. But to the colonists, they felt like an attack on their rights. Protests spread quickly. Colonists boycotted British goods. They refused to buy certain products. Groups like the Sons of Liberty organized resistance. In cities like Boston, anger exploded into the streets. British officials were threatened. Tax collectors were pressured to resign. Crowds gathered in protest. The conflict was no longer just about money. It was about power. Who had the right to control life in America? The king and parliament across the ocean? Or the people who actually lived there? On March 5, 1770, tension in Boston turned deadly. A crowd of colonists surrounded a group of British soldiers. People shouted insults. Snowballs and objects were thrown. The soldiers panicked. Then shots rang out. 5 colonists were killed. The event became known as the Boston Massacre. To the British, it was a tragic accident, but to many colonists, it was proof that British soldiers had become an occupying force. Patriot leaders used the event to spread revolutionary anger. One famous image showed British soldiers firing coldly into an innocent crowd. The message was powerful. Britain was no longer protecting the colonies. Britain was threatening them. In 1773, Britain passed the Tea Act. It gave the British East India Company a special advantage in selling tea to the colonies. Many colonists saw this as another attempt to control colonial trade. In Boston, resistance reached a dramatic moment. On the night of December 16, 1773, a group of colonists boarded British ships in Boston Harbor. They threw 342 chests of tea into the water. This became known as the Boston Tea Party. It was bold, it was rebellious, and it made Britain furious. King George III and Parliament decided that Boston had to be punished. They passed harsh laws that colonists called the Intolerable Acts. Boston Harbor was closed. Local government was restricted. British power increased. But instead of frightening the colonies into obedience, these punishments united them. For the first time, many colonists realized, if Britain could punish Boston today, it could punish any colony tomorrow. In 1774, representatives from 12 colonies met in Philadelphia. This meeting was called the First Continental Congress. The delegates were not yet ready to declare independence, but they agreed that Britain had gone too far. They called for boycotts of British goods and demanded that colonial rights be respected. Among the leaders were men who would later become famous: George Washington, John Adams, Patrick Henry, and others. Patrick Henry captured the growing mood when he said, "The distinctions between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, and New Englanders are no more. I am not a Virginian, but an American." That was a powerful change. The colonies were beginning to see themselves as one people, not separate colonies, one America. In April 1775, British troops marched toward Concord, Massachusetts, to seize colonial weapons, but colonial riders, including Paul Revere, warned the countryside. Militia fighters, known as Minutemen, prepared to resist. At Lexington, British soldiers met colonial militia on the village green. No one knows who fired first, but a shot was fired, and with that, the American Revolution began. It became known as the shot heard round the world. The British moved on to Concord, but colonial fighters attacked them along the road back to Boston. For the British Army, it was a shocking moment. These were not professional soldiers. They were farmers, shopkeepers, and ordinary men, but they were willing to fight. The conflict had crossed the line. There was no easy way back. By 1776, many colonists believed reconciliation with Britain was impossible. A writer named Thomas Paine published a pamphlet called Common Sense. It argued that America should become independent. The pamphlet spread quickly and influenced thousands of people. Then, in Philadelphia, the Continental Congress made a historic decision. Thomas Jefferson was chosen to write the Declaration of Independence. On July 4, 1776, the Congress approved it. The Declaration announced that the 13 colonies were free and independent states. Its most famous words still echo today. All men are created equal. Of course, America did not fully live up to those words at the time. Slavery still existed. Women had few political rights. Native nations faced violence and displacement. But the Declaration created a powerful idea. Government should get its power from the people. And if a government becomes destructive, the people have the right to change it. This was revolutionary. Not just for America, for the world. Declaring independence was one thing. Winning it was another. The British Army was powerful, trained, and well supplied. The Americans were often short on food, weapons, clothing, and money. General George Washington led the Continental Army through years of hardship. At Valley Forge, soldiers suffered through a brutal winter. Many had no proper shoes. Disease spread. Supplies were low. But they stayed. They trained. They endured. They refused to give up. The turning point came in 1777 at Saratoga, when American forces won a major victory. That victory convinced France to support the American cause. French money, soldiers, ships, and supplies became critical. Finally, in 1781, American and French forces trapped the British Army at Yorktown, Virginia. British General Cornwallis surrendered. The war was effectively over. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris officially ended the war. Britain recognized the independence of the United States. A new nation had been born. But the revolution did not solve every problem. The young country still faced deep divisions, economic struggles, and the terrible contradiction of slavery. Building a nation would be just as difficult as winning one. Still, the American Revolution changed history. It proved that an empire could be challenged. It showed that people could demand a government based on rights, representation, and consent. And it introduced an idea that would inspire movements around the world. Freedom is not given easily. It is argued for, fought for, sacrificed for, and protected by every generation that comes after. The American Revolution was not just a war. It was the beginning of an idea that ordinary people could stand against impossible odds and change the future. History is not always written in books. Sometimes, it is buried beneath silence, hidden in forgotten places, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. But every discovery comes with a warning. If you want more powerful historical documentaries, follow for the next story.